country in the world is Spain, and they have a king, the Habsburg dynasty. Don't make me do a 3-hour lecture on that. Ferdinand and Isabella, okay? The next, from 1648 until 1815, that's Napoleon, France is the #1 country in the world. Lingua franca. If you read War and Peace, the first half of the book, all the Russians are speaking French. Everyone wants to be French culture, you know? So they ran the world from that period. The next, England. England defeats Napoleon at Waterloo, so the 19th century is about the British Empire. They control 25% of the world population. And then World War I, World War II, that ended them, and the United States is now the #1 power in the world. Notice, see how that works? Spain, France, England, the United States. Does this mean we have a permanent position there? No, no. Empires and kingdoms rise and fall. That's one thing we know from reading the Bible. Okay? So right now the United States happens to be in the #1 position, but back in the day, back when we're talking about our country emerges out of this stuff. The fight between Spain and France and England. Okay? Who is this? Martin Luther. Okay? Oh. Okay, who is this? Martin Luther. Martin Luther is a Protestant reformer. I spend most of my life not talking about Jesus, but explaining to people the difference between Martin Luther and Martin Luther King Jr. Notice, this guy is the white dude. He's a German guy that lived 500 years ago with a red nose. He drank beer. He lived in Wurtemberg, Germany. He never went to Alabama. No, he's not the American Civil Rights leader. The only thing the kids know is Martin Luther King Jr. That's the only thing they know about history, okay? So we like Martin Luther King Jr., but he's not it, okay? So he's the Protestant reformer. Extremely important individual, and in the coming weeks, I think I'll do a whole couple of ZUs just on Martin Luther, so you know who he is. A little background here, right? He's an Old Testament professor at Wittenberg University. And again, the 4 solas, we'll talk about this. Sola means alone, faith alone, scripture alone, grace alone, and Christ alone. Okay, we'll talk about that later on. A second-generation Protestant reformer is John Calvin. Now, is he important?
Yeah.
He's really important, especially if you talk about political science, civics type stuff. Our Constitution would not have been produced by Lutherans. Okay, why is that? Martin Luther is a conservative person with a lowercase c. He believes that you leave politics alone. And if you have a complaint, you have a problem with the government, you go to the prince and you take your appeal to the prince and the monarch and they'll deal with it. So Luther is not a political reformer. He's a theologian who basically says the world's going to end soon anyway. Just leave the system alone. Don't try to overthrow the world government. See the difference? So he would just say, well, take it up with the king if you have a problem. Okay? John Calvin, on the other hand, he is a lawyer. He's French. He's a lawyer. He ends up in Geneva, Switzerland. John Calvin is really the theological founder of America, not Martin Luther. Lutherans are kind of, we're not really Catholic, we're not really Protestant, we're somewhere in the middle there. We kind of do our own thing. Calvin, on the other hand, very, very interesting guy. He's a lawyer, he writes like a lawyer, he's a systematic thinker. Luther is a bomb-throwing pamphleteer. So Luther would be like President Trump sending tweets out all the time, and his supporters would tell him things like, don't write that pamphlet. Oh no, don't do it. You're embarrassing us. You're making us look bad. Don't do it, don't do it. Calvin, on the other hand, is very systematic, very careful. He's a lonely scholar, okay? He ends up in Switzerland. His big book is called The Institutes of the Christian Religion. If this was the 15-week political science course, we'd spend the first several weeks going through the institutes, and I could show you how Calvin's theological thinking turns into a republic.
We should do that.
I'll explain it to you in about 2 seconds. I'll give you the brief form, okay? But, and what's his sovereignty? He believes in the sovereignty of God. That's like his #1 thing. He also believes in things like obedience to God's law. We're supposed to be obedient to the laws of God. In other words, he's not a revolutionary, as in overturn monarchies or anything. And he's a Swiss reformer, works in Geneva Institute. He believes in double predestination, Bobby. We as Lutherans believe in single predestination.
Ouch.
Only some of us.
It's a 3-hour lecture on that, but that's a very important thing. And here's this book, Institutes of Christian Religion. It's a 2-volume set, right? You can spend years going through this. It's an amazing piece of work. And these are some of the things he believes in. Total depravity. Okay, what does that mean? The fall of Adam and Eve. The Bible is what? Creation, fall, redemption. 1, 2, 3. God created the heaven and the earth. It's perfect. Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden fall. Sin and death entered the worlds with the fall. And we are sons and daughters of Adam and Eve. Therefore, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. All means all, doesn't it? Okay? So total depravity is the key, one of the foundational ideas of John Calvin. Okay? Now, all means what? All. And that includes who? The king and queen. You cannot have the divine right of kings and monarchy if you believe in total depravity. Because total depravity means the head of your state is just as corrupt as you are. And if that's true, what does it mean? You have to have checks and balances, and you have to keep an eye on these people. The king has to be accountable. Is that something that Europeans are familiar with? No, because they believe that the monarch is the divine right of kings. If the king can be capricious and do whatever he wants, it's good to be the king. However, in a republic, you have to keep an eye on people. Checks and balances. Because the best person could be corrupted, right? Because sin is always there. So total depravity is what's the opposite of total depravity? Man is inherently good. Okay, so we'll talk about this in a second. Okay, so total depravity is John Calvin. Man is inherently good. That's Jean-Jacques Rousseau. I'll show you him a picture in a second. You look perplexed there.
No, that's also the case when you talk religiously with the Roman Catholic Church, feeling that the Pope is infallible.
The vicar of Christ means in place of Christ on earth, the Pope reigns over you as a monarch. See? So in European history, the Catholic Church is always on the wrong side of history. They always support the monarchy against the republic or democracy. So every time there's a revolution, like the French Revolution, the Catholic Church is on the wrong side. Right? And it's because of that idea that the Pope is a monarch. And whether the Pope is above or equal to or below the kings of Europe, that's called the investiture controversy. Who gets to be the ruler of Europe, the Holy Roman Emperor or the Pope? So they scrap about this for like 1,000 years. Okay? Of course, the Pope claims supremacy over all kings on earth, and kings would say the other way around. Okay? Yeah, go ahead.
So the Pope basically is depraved like we are.
That's what Calvin would say, because Calvin is a second-generation Protestant reformer. Protestant. Okay? So total depravity is a key thought. And again, in a Catholic world, we would never have produced the U.S. Constitution. It's a product of Calvinism, not even Lutheranism. It's a Calvinistic document.
Well, just one step further.
Go ahead.
So if he's also depraved, who does the checks and balances on him?
Oh, on the Pope, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, that's the problem. So that's why Protestants would say the Pope might be a nice man and all that, but we don't fall under the hierarchy.
So he confesses.
We believe in the priesthood of all believers. What does that mean?
Yeah.
We're all
You're
equal.
baptized, right? That makes you equal to me,
Right.
equal to Pastor Roy, the head of our denomination. It also makes you equal to the Pope and every other person that claims to
So
be a
the
Christian.
Pope could go to a confessor, the same as we do.
We don't do
would.
private confession. We have public confession
Public
of
confession,
sins,
right.
The Pope is not. The Pope is a sinner
He's
too.
not infallible.
Right.
The Pope is not infallible. No
Yeah,
one is.
But anyway, so don't get. We'll talk about that another day, right? So I'm just trying to tell you, John Calvin, total depravity. This is a huge thing, and it has political implications, and it's hereditary. In other words, because you're human, right? All have sinned. It means we're all sons and daughters of Adam and Eve. Therefore, total depravity is a problem. Okay? How do you spell sin? S-I-N, I at the center. Okay? We always act in our own self-interest. Okay? Spread of Calvinism. Okay, I'm not a Calvin. What's Calvin? Who knows that? All right, Calvinism, they had a university that they set up in Geneva, and it became like the center of the world. Everybody in Europe that didn't like monarchy or objected with the abuses of the Roman Catholic Church, they would come to Geneva and study. So it's an international place. French people who are Calvinists, are called Huguenots. Huguenot Street down in New Paltz. Okay, England, Puritans. They went to Geneva and they came back to England and they wanted to purify the Church of England, get it back to Calvinistic principles. Okay? The separatists are the ones that landed on Plymouth Rock, right? John Knox, who is he? He's a Presbyterian. Presbyterianism is Calvinism. Okay? And the Netherlands, Dutch Reform people are Calvinist. So who are the movers and shakers in the Hudson River Valley? It's the Dutch Reform people. The Dutch were here first, and they own the land. They own Rhinebeck, you know, right? They own the land in Rhinebeck, and you have to pay like $10 a year if you have a house in Rhinebeck to the Dutch Reformed Church. You can't get out of it. It's a grant from the King of England, right? So Reformed that's the church. Lutherans are newcomers. Catholics are newcomers. Jews are newcomers. Okay, so these are all Calvinists. So the American colonies. Puritans, Congregational people, Unitarians had a tremendous influence on writing our Constitution. So Calvinism is the fountainhead. What's this? Here's something that you need to know about. This is called the 30 Years' War. The Protestant Reformation is 1517. 100 years later, you have a world war. How bad was this? This thing killed 1/3 to 1/2 the population of the people who lived in German-speaking lands. Remember, there's no united Germany until 1871? They lost 1/3 to 1/2 the population. Oh, the COVID, 210,000 people died. Our population is 330 million. If we lost half the population, 150 million people killed in a war over a 30-year. How long was World War II? That was bad. 6 years. This was World War II for 30 years. And they fought in Germany. And they had mercenaries. 25,000, 30,000 troops would show up in Rhinebeck. They camped here for the winter, throw everybody outside, live in your house, eat up all your food, and then when they're done, burn the town down and leave. So tremendous plagues, famines, burnings, and then the mercenaries, that means you fight for money. What happens if the king can't pay you? You change sides. This is like hell. People thought it was the end of the world. Okay? So, what was the war about? The Protestants fought the Catholics. Right? The Spanish Habsburgs are Roman Catholic. They fought the Protestants, princes in Germany. And, for good measure, the French, who are always on the wrong side of every war, that's a principle, they fought on the side of the Protestants despite being Roman Catholic, because they hated the Catholic Habsburgs more than they hated the Protestants in Germany. It's an unbelievable fiasco, right? And if you go to Germany today, you go to Rothenburg, right? Been to Rothenburg, is it a cute, quaint town with that? Well, they destroyed Rothenburg 3 or 4 times during the 30 Years' War. Finally, they abandoned the town. I mean, this is like one of the great calamities. When you go to Germany, they don't talk about World War II and World War I. They talk about the 30 Years' War like it happened last week, and most dopey Americans are like, was it 30 years? Yeah, we have no idea, okay? But for them, it's fresh in their memory. What is the lesson of the 30 Years' War? Ready for this? We don't fight about religion anymore. The idea of religious tolerance is born in the slaughter of the 30 Years' War. So you're like, I can't stand Catholics. I'm going to go to war and hunt them all down and kill them. Well, why do we do that? Because we have an amendment in our Constitution, the First Amendment, right? Religious freedom, religious liberty. So the old world, they're slaughtering each other over there on the other side of the pond. So when did the Pilgrims land here? 1620. When did the 30 Years' War start? 1618. They're slaughtering each other over religion. They're just getting started. Over here, we're like, no, we're not going to fight about religion over here. We believe in tolerance. That is, you get to worship God any way you want, even if it offends my beliefs. Suck it up. right? Because we, the founders, knew about the 30 Years' War. This is a disaster of the highest magnitude. People always say that people don't learn from history. The founders knew about the 30 Years' War because it was fresh news when this country was born. Okay? So what's the Enlightenment? The Enlightenment is a reaction against the 30 Years' War. That's an easy way to understand it. Okay? In other words, we believe in human progress. Is that an unusual thing? During the Middle Ages, there is no progress, right? You're a serf, you're a peasant. What do you do for a living? What your father did for a living and what your grandfather did there's no upward social mobility. There's no progress. Enlightenment people, we believe in progress. And one of the big steps is freedom of religion is a very important thing. We're not going to fight about religion anymore. Okay, what is the Enlightenment? Here's what happens if you say, all right, let's suppress religion and not fight about religion anymore. How do you get people to be good and moral? That's a problem, isn't it? And so, as a Christian, it's easier for us. We would just say, love God, love your neighbor. Okay? The 10 Commandments, the first 3 tell you how to get along with God. The second 7 tell you how to get along with your neighbor. No brainer. So Christian social ethics is just read the 10 Commandments and apply that to your miserable life. That's the answer. Maybe the golden rule. Do unto others as you have others do unto you. You like being abused and battered and screwed and taken advantage of? Well then, don't do that to other people. That's called the golden rule. Okay? So that's Christian social ethics. So with the Enlightenment, you have to come up with a system to get people to be good and moral without saying, thus saith the Lord. For us, it's easy. Right? Moses went to the mountain, gets the 10 Commandments, comes down the mountain, boom, God said it, so thou shalt not murder, end of story. Okay? But for people that don't believe in God or have a different concept of God, they have to come up with a way to make you good and moral without saying, God told me to do it. One of the disturbing trends in America is that they don't like it when kids do the pledge to the flag. And so they take out the word, one nation under God. They don't like God. So then you go to a public school, they have all these signs all over the place that'll be like, respect, kindness. A couple days ago was National Kindness Day. Well, if you don't have a standard of telling you what is the absolute, like God is the embodiment of kindness, okay? Well, if you don't believe in God, what are you going to do? That leaves you making your ethics this way, okay? So you end up with things like, I'm kind compared to how Joe Choupé treats people. So kindness by what standard, right? And it gets even weirder. If you believe in Darwinian evolution, survival of the fittest stuff, then the people who are cruel and unusual are the ones that survive and thrive. So you shouldn't be telling kids to be kind. You should tell them to be cruel and unusual so you can really get ahead in the world. Oh. It's a completely arbitrary value, isn't it? Like, why is your value better than, like, why is kindness, under your definition, better than cruelty? There's no difference, right? The only reason you know the difference between kindness and cruelty is because God sets the standard. If human beings set the standard, I'm doing you a favor by killing you because you're wasting the earth's precious resources. You're a handicapped person. You should be killed because you're not producing anything of value. That's Nazi ethics, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Right? So again, God says, thou shalt not murder. You have human dignity, even if you're not able to produce enough to make the national economy thrive.
That's right.
See how that works? Okay? So the Enlightenment program, it's a product of the 30 Years' War. It's also a product of how do you get people to be good and moral and ethical without saying, thus saith the Lord? Enlightenment thinkers. Science and reason is breaking out at this time also. So you've got, this is why they believe in progress, because science is finally emerging. Remember, in the pre-scientific world, you have alchemy and astronomy. Alchemy and astrology. So alchemy is a metaphysical thing, and that gives birth to the physical thing, physics and science, chemistry. Astrology is star charts, you know. Astrology gives way, that's a pseudoscience, metaphysical, to the pure science of astronomy. So the scientific revolution, you have a break between the pseudoscientific stuff, the gobbledygook, the superstitions, and the pure science. That's why they had a pretty favorable attitude about human progress. I mean, imagine, after thousands of years, we're abandoning the idea of the Greeks and the four body humors and, you know, Aristotelian stuff, and we're moving into pure science, right? So reason, science, religious tolerance, natural rights, these are all Enlightenment values, okay? What does natural rights mean? It means, well, the Creator, right, gave you life, liberty, and property, right? Life. So you appeal to nature, okay? They have a favorable view of nature. And who are some people that we associate? John Locke, Montesquieu, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Okay, so we're going to talk about each one of these in a little bit. Who's John Locke? John Locke is an Enlightenment thinker. He grew up studying Calvinism and reading the Holy Bible, okay? But John Locke's political writings are based on his Calvinist worldview, okay? So, in other words, you take John Calvin's total depravity idea, a republic, not a monarchy, and you secularize it, that's John Locke. So it goes Calvin to John Locke. Where does John Locke go? Thomas Jefferson. Okay, so there's like a direct feed. Calvin, Locke, Jefferson, American Revolution, Constitution stuff. Okay? So it's like a direct feed. Hey, Beethoven. Right. All right. So John Locke, right? He's a key thinker in the Enlightenment, right? He writes about tolerance, again. Why? Because the 30 Years' War is a slaughter, right? And these are the ideas of classical liberalism. Stop. What's the difference between conservative and liberal? Be careful, right? In Europe, a conservative is one who supports monarchy. And usually the Roman Catholic Church or the Church of England. High church people, okay? That's a conservative. Liberals are classical liberals. They believe in these ideas, things like human rights, liberty, life, liberty, property, religious tolerance, the spontaneous order, meaning you step back and let people do what they want to do. In other words, freedom. They believe in Adam Smith economic principles. Laissez-faire means leave it alone, right? The Beatles song, let it be, let it be. That's what it means, let it be, okay? So these are all classical liberal values. Well then, are liberals today the same as classical liberals back then? No. The term liberal was first used during the Woodrow Wilson administration and then by the Franklin Roosevelt people because the term progressive was considered odious. So they thought liberal would sell better. Okay? So you have to be careful because sometimes these terms shift over time. So always say conservative. What does that mean? It doesn't mean William F. Buckley and National Review. In European history, it means people that support the Pope and the monarch and, you know, the tradition. Classical liberals are people that believe in, like, think of Thomas Jefferson, free trade, right? Okay? So this comes from John Locke. Liberalism is what? A reaction to royal absolutism. In other words, what are the four kinds of government? Monarchy, republic, democracy, anarchy. These liberals are people who believe in a republican system with lowercase r, not the Republican Party. Again, it's a name that doesn't help you here. So a monarchy, divine right of kings, liberals would say, no, we reject that concept. So the American Constitution is an anti-monarchist document. So that's very important to understand that. Again, we're back to this again. Okay, so use your four. So our Constitution is in here, and we are purposely rejecting this. Okay? Hey, let me tell you something interesting here. You know George Washington is, right? He's the guy in the dollar bill. Okay? He's called the father of our country. Isn't that interesting? He's sterile. Why? He had smallpox in the Barbados when he was like 17. He's sterile. He couldn't have children. Is that a good thing? For those of us that have children, yes, it is a very good thing. Mike, you know this is true. It's like, oh yeah, the blessing of children. Yeah, that's good. I'd be a rich and happy man now if it wasn't for the blessing of children, right? So, no, George White didn't have any children. Is that good? Yeah, because there were still people running around that said, if George Washington Jr. was around, he would be our next monarch. So the fact that George Washington was our first president, they liked him because he didn't have any children. There's no danger of this country turning into a monarchy. They were afraid we were going to go back the other way, in other words, right? And what's the greatest thing George Washington ever did? He served 2 4-year terms, and he resigned, he put down his sword, and he went back to Mount Vernon, and he grew potatoes or cabbages or whatever he did. In the history of world revolutions, this has never happened before. Typically, you get proclaimed El Presidente for life, right? And your son takes over. And then your son, his son takes over. You end up with a dynasty like in North Korea, right? These guys are communists. What is it? No, you're not supposed to have a monarchy type system where your grandfather and your father and now you're the dictator. That's a bizarre thing.
So,
right?
So Thomas Jefferson was caught in between that. So he wanted to go back to Monticello all the time. And
Oh,
do
yeah.
farming. But then he was dragged back into the political
Yep.
routine.
He didn't.
Back and forth and back and forth.
On his tombstone, it doesn't say he was president of the United States.
Yeah.
He founder of the University of Virginia and author of the Virginia Bill of Rights. He didn't like being president. You know, he didn't like. He's an interesting character. We'll talk about him in a little bit too, so don't go away. All right. So democracy. Okay. Let's talk about this for a minute. The alternative is monarchy. That's this system here. Okay. Well, our system. Oh no, there it is. All right. So this is where we're coming from. This is the old world order, right? So if you keep your systems in mind, it'll help understand the Constitution. All right. So Enlightenment. The Constitution is a product of the Enlightenment world. Okay. And again, John Locke, Essays Concerning Human Understanding. All right. A little bit about Thomas Jefferson. He's the 3rd president of the United States. He's elected in 1800. Okay, is this presidential election a difficult thing? Oh, it's so divisive and all that. You don't know nothing. The 1800 election, this is tame. It was vicious, right? I mean, it was absolutely vicious. It's amazing there wasn't a civil war in 1800 over this. John Adams from Massachusetts thought he won, the Federalists, and then instead this country bumpkin, Thomas Jefferson, wins. It goes to the House of Representatives. They voted, he barely won. The Adams people are bitter about it. And, I mean, it was a nasty, nasty, nasty election. Worse than the one we're going through now. Okay? The other one is 1860 when Lincoln was elected. That caused a civil war because the Democrats in the South, Confederates, didn't accept the outcome of the 1860 election. They weren't willing to live with having a Republican Lincoln in the White House, so they went to war. Okay, so Thomas Jefferson, he doesn't like being president. He's a tall dude, 6'4", red hair, high squeaky voice, hates public speaking. So he pours all of his energy into his writing. He's a writer. Do we know another president who was a writer? Abraham Lincoln. Tall, gangly dude. People made fun of how ugly he was. High squeaky voice. He was a brilliant writer, though. Okay? Ultimately, we talk about Jefferson and we talk about Lincoln. Their words are basically American scripture, right? Okay, so we'll talk about this. Okay, so here it is. This is a rough draft of the Declaration of Independence, and let's do a little bit of it now. You probably thought I would never get to the book. It's important to lay the foundation, though. All right, the Declaration of Independence. Okay, first of all, does it have a date? Yes, it does. July 4th, 1776. Okay? And let's do, all right. What is the Declaration of Independence is basically a divorce agreement from England. England is a monarchy. We don't want to be considered subjects of King George III anymore. So it's a legal argument laid out for the impartial world to read. Okay? So, what in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another. Okay, stop. What does that mean? The argument from the monarchist point of view would be, what do you mean? Who are you, subjects, saying that you can dissolve the bands? Who are you? And our argument would be, no, this is a republic and we're citizens. We're not subjects of a king. Okay? You've heard in the American Revolution, one of the big complaints, this is from James Otis. No taxation without representation. What does that mean? James Otis is genius, right? He's like a bumper sticker guy. He wrote like pamphlet. He was standing at his door and he got struck by lightning and killed. They got a freak accident. He probably would have gone on to be president or something. He was really highly regarded. No taxation without representation. So in a monarchist system, who represents you?
The king.
The king is like your father. And he knows what's best for you because you're too simple and too stupid. So the king decides what the tax level should be. He's the one who represents you. So when you say no taxation without representation, the monarchist's response would be, you are represented by George III. He's an outstanding king. What's the problem? See how that works? Right? And so the whole argument then is, and it's back in England, they have a thing called Whig democracy. Okay, what does Whig democracy means? Whig democracy means you have to own property in order to have the right to vote. So what does that mean? Think of a condominium. Condominium? You have a condominium association meeting? Who votes at the condominium association meeting?
The owners of the...
People that own a condominium in the association. Do you have people that live across the street in the housing project coming over to vote on your condominium association? No, you don't. It's only the people that are members of it. That's called Whig democracy. You have to own property to have the right to vote. So in America, when for the first, 50 years, who voted? Landowners voted. Men over age 21 who are landowners voted. And as the country gets older, we broaden the franchise. When did women have the right to vote?
Oh,
You don't know this?
no, 18...
Yeah, the 19th Amendment was passed in 1920. So it's been about 100 years that women have had the right to vote. Isn't that interesting? Because it started out Whig democracy, okay? So so Thomas Jefferson wrote this thing, and this is not his penmanship. They actually hired a calligrapher to write this. It's beautiful when you look at it. Author of the Declaration of Independence. He's influenced by who? John Locke. And who influenced John Locke? John Calvin told the Property of Man. He changed John Locke's famous phrase, all right? If you do the second paragraph here, it's, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, life, liberty, and property. Stop, stop, and stop. First of all, where do your rights come from? The Creator. Don't even say God. It's the Creator. Okay? So, your rights come from the Creator. And what did the Creator do? The Creator created you in the image of God, in His image and likeness. All human rights flow from the concept that you can't just kill Robert because Robert is created in the image and likeness of God, and the commandment is, thou shalt not murder. Whose job is it to take Robert's life?
God.
God alone will decide when Robert's time is up. Of course, I'm exempt from that. So, then why did Thomas Jefferson change the line life, liberty, and property? He changed it to what? Life, liberty, and... Why did he change that?
Because of the slave.
Yeah, in the American South, if you said life, liberty, and property, what's property?
Slaves.
Yeah. Chattel slavery means you own the slaves. And why is it that the Southerners didn't just say, okay, let's abolish slavery, it makes sense to get rid of them? Ready? If you owned 100 slaves and you own a lot of land, remember they have a lot of land and they have a labor shortage. Right? That's the weird American problem. In Europe, they have a high population with a limited amount of land. Here it's the other way around. We have all this land, you own 100 slaves. What happens? You need money, right? In the South, they're land rich, but they have a cash flow problem. So you go to the bank, and what do? You say, I'd like to take out a mortgage on my 1,000 acres, no problem. I'd also like to take out a mortgage on the 100 slaves that I own. Mm-hmm. So you could actually use slaves as collateral on loans.
Kappa.
Then along comes some genius from Massachusetts where they don't have slavery, and they'll say, we need to abolish slavery. Fine. Who's going to pay back all my loans? Mm-hmm. See, so this is why it was such an emotional thing. They actually used slaves as collateral on mortgages, and they're in debt up to their ears. Okay? So when Jefferson put this in here, does Thomas Jefferson own slaves?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, he does. But Thomas Jefferson is opposed to slavery on a philosophical basis, but guess what? He tries to run Monticello. He's a good president, a great philosopher, a great thinker, but a terrible businessman. He was in debt his whole life, always running from creditors. So here he's got 200 or 300 or 400 slaves. He can't get rid of them because he's borrowed against them, right? You can't just say, okay, you can leave now, okay? So, but he's against slavery, so he puts in the little seed, the little word, pursuit of happiness, as a substitute for the Lockean phrase property, life, liberty, and property, because he wants slaves not to be considered to be property. And ultimately, the seeds of the Declaration of Independence ultimately bring about the Emancipation Proclamation, December 1st, 1863. What document did Abraham Lincoln read and study? The Declaration of Independence. Do you know that in the 1840s and 50s, most people had completely forgotten about the Declaration of Independence? It's the Whig Republican Lincoln who started using the Declaration of Independence as a way to say all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain, all means all men. So the ideas of abolishing slavery are rooted in Thomas Jefferson's seed that he planted that blossomed like 60 years, 70 years later. It's amazing, right? He believed that all men are created equal, right? Okay, here he is, great picture of Jefferson. He liked to have his picture painted, and you know. Here's the Jefferson Memorial. Who put the Jefferson Memorial up? James Russell Pope is the architect. He's the one who did Constitution Hall, Daughters of the American Revolution. He also did the National Archives building and the House of the Temple in Washington, D.C. Great architect. Who did this? It was put up during the Roosevelt administration. And you can see it from the White House. Roosevelt's in a wheelchair. He could look out the window and see the Jefferson Memorial right over there across the reflection pond. Why did they do that? He's a Democrat. Okay, so Democrat presidents tend to exalt and lift up Democrat Party people. So Andrew Jackson, the Democrat, became very popular during the New Deal period also.
Mark,
okay, yeah, go ahead.
I read where, getting back to Jefferson again, I read in a, I forgot the guy's name anyway, where he had to go head and toe against his friends in Virginia.
Oh yeah,
And
because he was.
those people were just seized when
Yeah.
he became president. So that must have, erupted.
Well, John Marshall
eventually.
was a relative of his who was a Federalist, and he hated Thomas Jefferson.
Yeah.
The Supreme Court, we'll get to that at another we're probably enough time today.
But that group must have seized.
John Adams, the Federalist, was on his way out. He appointed John Marshall to be Justice of the Supreme Court, and he basically butted heads with Jefferson the whole time Jefferson was in. He's a Federalist, right? So anyway, so Jefferson is a very important person. And of course, they want to tear him down, tear down the statue because he had slaves, right? Well, again, what do? You don't tear down monuments. You say, what can I learn from this? Right? Just like today is Columbus Day. Well, Columbus is probably the most important person of the last 1,000 years. Because he is the one that arrived here in 1492. There wouldn't be a new world. He literally changed the world. We thought it was Europe, Asia, and Africa. Because of Columbus, we now know there are 7 continents. There's another whole world out there. And good things and bad things happen because Columbus came here. Right? That's the way history is. Do you know who's perfect? I don't see anybody perfect around here. How about Franklin Roosevelt? Is he perfect? He did a lot of really good things. Right? Without his leadership, World War II would have gone completely another way. Right? He did a lot of great things. He also did some really awful things. Right? And I won't even go into it all now, but everybody does good things and bad things, right? So if you want to have like a purity test and then go around and smash all the people that don't approve to your list, you're not going to have any history left at all, right? Because we've all sinned, right? Anyway, so you need to learn from Jefferson. For him, Jefferson, the Holy Trinity he's an Enlightenment thinker. Roger Bacon, Sir Isaac Newton, and John Locke. We already talked about John Locke a little bit. Roger Bacon is he's a Franciscan, right? Religious Christian, okay? He's also one of the beginners of modern science, comes through his scientific method. Sir Isaac Newton, of course, half the books that Sir Isaac Newton wrote, he's a Protestant, deal with the book of Revelation and religious topics, which people forget that. He wasn't like an atheist science, he's a Christian, not a Protestant. So he's also influenced by John Calvin. And of course John Locke, who secularized John Calvin. Who's this? Benjamin Franklin. He's a deist, but Benjamin Franklin is an Enlightenment thinker. He retired when he was 43 years old from the printing industry. That's the information age. You know, today he'd be a computer nerd, right? Instead, he's the printing press guy. And he made a lot of money, and he was able to retire at age 43, and he spent the rest of his life trying to make the world a better place, doing Enlightenment things. Scientists and so on. I love this one. You know, the kite.
Yeah.
Don't try that at home, kids. Right? Scientific method, right? This is Voltaire. Talk a little bit about him. Voltaire is a humorous guy. He's from France. He's a Freemason. Very interesting character. And I love what he says here. I do not agree with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. Do we believe that? No. We believe I talk and you sit there and listen to me while I say slanderous things about your person and your mother and everyone else. It's always a one-way thing, right? I talk and you listen. You're not allowed to have a debate anymore, okay? Well, Voltaire would say, what is your lunatic opinion? Okay, you tell me. All right, now let me tell you what's wrong with this. You make a list, you actually have a discussion. What happens when you have a debate or a discussion with somebody? You reach a higher level of understanding, don't you? Are you going to change their mind? No, but you might change somebody's mind who's following the debate. You have an idea, I have an idea. Okay, let's talk about it then. Go back and forth again. It's called, in the Middle Ages, it's called a disputation. So, what do we do in colleges today? The genius professor stands up and tries to indoctrinate the students on his particular or her particular worldview. In the Middle Ages, they have a disputation. The Benedictines on this side, the Augustinian hermit monks on this side, and all the students get the day off, maybe a week off, and you sit around. This guy will talk for an hour, this guy will talk for 2 hours, this guy will talk for 3 hours, the back and forth, where's the truth? The truth emerges from the disputation. See? This is a brilliant thing to do. And I don't know about you, but you know, I've been hanging around colleges for like 20 years. I learn more from the speakers that they bring in who do presentations than I do from the course material or for the courses that are being offered. So a disputation would be like an event where people come in and talk about it. So Voltaire, he believes in what? Free speech. Freedom of the press. Yeah, but they say things that I don't like and it hurts my feelings. Free press means you don't have to read it, you can hit the delete button, you have a better idea, tell me what it is. Right? So this comes from Voltaire. Is that a radical idea? That's an Enlightenment idea. Why? Because prior to this time, ideas come from the king, who has court historians and court writers who write things that he approves of, and you as a peasant have to read that, and you have to like it because it's for the king's. The king is watching out for you. He's like your father, and you're too stupid to understand it, so I'll do all your thinking for you. That's monarchist thinking. In a republic, we believe in education, freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of the press. These are liberties that we take for granted in our country, that are embedded in our country. It comes from Voltaire, right? He's very interesting. His famous saying, crush the infamy, right? And the infamy would be the church and the state in France prior to the French Revolution. The Catholic Church was not on the side of enlightenment here, were they? Right? They had index of forbidden books. What does that mean? They published a list of books you're not allowed to read because it goes against the teachings of the church. Well, I don't know about you, but that's the books I want to read. Right? So an Enlightenment person would say, I'll read all the books and I'll make up my own mind. Well, that's an Enlightenment idea. Another Voltaire, he lived a long life. This is a fascinating thing, of course I'm running out of time here. In 1755, Lisbon, Portugal and Spain, remember, they're at the top of their game right now because of the New World, all the money coming in. Big trade center, Portuguese, right? There's an earthquake that killed like 30, 50,000 people. I think it was on like Easter Sunday or something. All these people had gathered in this big Catholic church for Mass. The whole building came down and killed them all, a couple thousand people.
Oh.
Gee.
So Voltaire, being one who's interested in things like this, would say, what's the point in believing in God if God killed them all in church? Right? That's a pretty good question, isn't it? So things like the 30 Years' War and things like this Lisbon earthquake, it's an act of God. It's not something that, it just kind of happened. And so how do you explain that? So this event helps to propel a lot of Enlightenment thinking. How do you explain stuff like this? Right? It's a fascinating subject. Annie wrote Candide. This is a really fun book. Actually, I read this about 10 years ago. The guy is really witty. It's kind of like National Lampoon or something. So religious tolerance, right? He found out about a famous case where a young boy was accused of being a Protestant, and he was paraded through the streets, beaten and broken on the wheel, right? Yeah, where they put you on a wagon wheel and they break all your bones, and then finally you're beheaded, right? Big public spectacle, because he was a Protestant. So Voltaire is not a terribly religious individual, but for him, this is beyond the pale. Killing somebody, torturing them because of their religion, right? So how revolutionary was the Enlightenment? Yeah, this is the next guy, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Now, you know about John Calvin, right? Total Depravity of Man? Yeah, yes, you know about that, don't you? You just agree with me. Yes, you do, okay? Jean-Jacques Rousseau is the opposite of John Calvin. So if you have your John Calvin under your belt, the opposite is Jean-Jacques Rousseau. So Jean-Jacques Rousseau believes man is inherently good, okay? And so let me see here. Here it is. Easy way to understand this. Man is inherently good, okay? Well, then why is the world messed up then? Evil or sin, he doesn't believe in God, so he doesn't really believe in sin, is caused by the environment. So why are people messed up? Because they grew up in a city and they were poor and impoverished or something, and that's why they're messed up.
But that doesn't make sense.
Well, go ahead.
If man is inherently good,
yes,
goodness reigns forever, where would the evil and sin come
well, if
break through that?
Man is inherently good, but then you have the problem of, well, how do you explain, demented maniacs or criminals?
Oh, okay.
And he would say, well, it's because of bad environment. So what do? You change the environment to change the man. Okay? So if people live in slums, you bulldoze the slums, and then you change the man. Okay? So he believes in, and with Calvinism, if you're a criminal, you kill and cannibalize the neighbors or something. What do they do with you? They go, okay, I'm sorry, we have a trial, due process of law, you're sentenced to death, and they kill you. Okay? With Jean-Jacques Rousseau, he would say, well, totally man is inherently good. Why did he murder, and cannibalize the neighbors? His mother beat him with a coat hanger and called him humiliating things or something. He had a bad environment. What do you do then? Well, you have to rehabilitate the person. He'll be out in 7 years on parole. See the difference? Calvinism believes do the crime, do the time. Jean-Jacques Rousseau says, you're a criminal, I'm so sorry about your bad environment, bad background, we'll rehabilitate you. So in America, which system do we use? The Calvinist system or the Jean-Jacques Rousseau system? We don't do either one very well. We don't really punish them like Calvin. We don't really rehabilitate them like Rousseau. We kind of drop the ball somewhere in the middle there.
I like number 4.
Yeah, cities are evil and country is good. So what do you do if you have juvenile delinquents like in the South Bronx or something?
Oh, God.
You send them up the river to the country to be rehabilitated.
Yeah.
So this is why the whole New York State prison system is a Rousseauian system. You go to Auburn, it's up the river, Sing Sing.
Sing is up the river.
Yeah, up the river. You want it out in the country because that's where rehabilitation will be found.
I can tell you, Mark, I sat in my chair, and I'll speak for Kingston anyway.
Yeah.
I can't tell you the number of social workers that brought kids from New York City up to this area.
Yeah. The country's good.
It was incredible.
Well, that's an example of Jean-Jacques Rousseau thinking. Change the environment, change the man. Okay?
Didn't happen.
Yeah, man is born free, but everywhere in chains. That's his famous quote. Why is that? Well, because of bad environment. You got to change the environment. Right? And here's Voltaire and Rousseau walking as an idealized portrait, the temple of fame and immortality, right? The truth is that Voltaire hated Rousseau, thought Rousseau was undisciplined and, a shallow thinker. And here's a statue of Voltaire and Rousseau in Geneva. Right? This is Rousseau. Look at the horrible stories. He had this illiterate woman who was his mistress, and he had 6 or 7 children by her. And when the children were born, he would take the kids and bring them to a founding hospital and drop them off.
Oh, my word.
But wait, he wrote a book on education. So he's an expert on education, but he dumped off his own 7 children. And of course, it's all based on the idea of, you have this young boy, he's educated in the school of nature because nature is good and pure, country is good. Children should not be forced to reason early in life. You let them do whatever they want. That sounds familiar. The aim is not moral autonomy, the aim was moral autonomy. Auto nomos, auto means self, nomos means law, right? You self-law. So get rid of the Bible and get rid of the religion stuff and let the kids do whatever they want. Auto nomos. That worked out well because he wanted to be a good citizen. Yeah, like in Cambodia with the Khmer Rouge, people had the 15-year-old boys, not corrupted by cities, killing the people from Phnom Penh because they're corrupted by civilization. So children are good because they haven't been corrupted yet by the evil environment. So you get them to do all your killing for you. 15-year-old boys make perfect fascists, right? Women are useful as mothers and wives only. Yeah, he's not exactly a feminist here, right? Natural is better, simple and uncorrupt. We have the health food movement, Natural food is better than processed food. That's all Rousseauian stuff. What time? We're probably running out of time here. I better end here.
Okay.
All right, you sort of get the point here?
No.
All right, any questions or anything?
Very good.
Take this home and read it over so that we're going to really get into it next week.